Why are we seeing so many Republican lawmakers parrot Trump's baseless claims about the weaponization of the U.S. judicial system against Trump?
The Republican Party is in the thrall of a now convicted felon and adjudicated rapist, and they are all jockeying for position in the party because that's what they're used to doing. They're used to parroting his lies and protecting this man who has basically done nothing but bring disgrace to the party. And it's just absurd. It's just mendacious on so many levels. I mean, first of all, the first person to be charged with any crime that involved the Stormy Daniels episode was, of course, Michael Cohen. And who charged Michael Cohen? It happens to be the United States Department of Justice in 2018. And lo and behold, who was president in 2018? I mean, this is just absurd. The man, Cohen, went to jail for doing, under federal law, for committing campaign finance violations that he admitted to and then testified to under oath just this past month. And the notion that somehow Donald Trump should get a pass for what Donald Trump's own Justice Department charged as a federal crime, which then became a predicate for the state law fraud that Donald Trump committed to cover up the federal crime, is just absurd. And to suggest that the Biden administration, I have been a lifelong Republican, but there is no weaponization of the Justice Department by Joe Biden. I mean, this notion, they argue that Joe Biden is senile, yet now he's somehow the mastermind behind what the district attorney of the county of New York is doing. It's just preposterous. And it's particularly preposterous in light of the fact that the Justice Department, Biden's own Justice Department, is prosecuting a Democratic senator in the Southern District of New York in a courthouse down the street from where Trump was tried, and is prosecuting Joe Biden's own son. That's not the weaponization of justice. That's, you can argue about one case or the other and whether it should be brought and the merits of one particular case and another. And I know people have strong feelings about those other cases, but that's justice. That's justice. That means people on both sides are being prosecuted by the Justice Department and by other prosecutors. And this is not a weaponization of justice. The reason why Donald Trump is now convicted of 34 felonies is because he committed 34 felonies, and a jury of 12 people, including one person who got his news only from Truth Social, Donald Trump's own personal social media website, found him unanimously guilty. And they found him obviously overwhelmingly guilty because it just didn't take them that long. They heard the evidence. There wasn't even I sat through that trial. I read the transcript. There was no defense. The case was never even close. And frankly, I think a lot of people in the media misled the public by suggesting that it might be anything but a runaway, a walk-off victory by a complete blowout by the prosecution, which it was, and the jury agreed.
Trump gave remarks earlier today, as we all know, slamming the verdict. I want to play a little part of that. Listen to this.
This is a scam. There's a rigged trial. It shouldn't have been in that venue. We shouldn't have had that judge. He should have allowed us to have an election expert. He wouldn't allow us to have witnesses. He wouldn't allow us to talk. He wouldn't allow us to do anything.
You were in court for parts of this trial, George. How do you respond to what he just said?
He's lying just the same way he lied about the election, lied about the temperature in the courtroom, lied about the security around the courthouse. He's lying. He could have put on any number of witnesses. The legal expert he put on was going to testify about the law, but under the rules of evidence in every state and in the federal courts, you can't put somebody to testify about domestic law. The fact is, he could have put on any of these, and he could have put on his son who signed one of the checks. He could have put on himself, but he was too scared. He would never have withstood cross-examination. He knew that. He doesn't. This man who doesn't always follow his lawyer's advice decided not to testify. He says all this stuff in the courthouse, out in the hallway, in Trump Tower, about how it was all rigged and it was all lies and this is false and that is false. Well, where is his testimony? He was too scared. He was too weak. He knew that he would be shown to be the absolute liar that the jury found him to be. And if anything, if he had testified, the jury verdict would have come back faster.
Yeah,
and he knows that.
I'm looking
and
at
he's
my
lying,
notes.
And that's what he does.
He said, I wanted to testify, that's a direct quote, I would have loved to have testified. He could have testified, nothing stopping him except himself. He decided not to testify. Earlier today, George, the House Speaker Johnson called on the U.S. Supreme Court to step in and set this record straight, his words, regarding the case. Do you see any reason why the U.S. Supreme Court would get involved?
It's amazing because I think Speaker Johnson is a lawyer, if I'm not mistaken, and he knows better than that. The way that an appeal happens is in the ordinary course. The defendant will be sentenced on July 11. At that point, the defendant can take an appeal to the Appellate Division, First Department of the Supreme Court of the State of New York, and then he can take another appeal if he loses there to the Court of Appeals of the State of New York, and then he can go to the Supreme Court of the United States if he has a federal issue to assert. And there is going to be no federal issue in this case.
George Conway, as usual, thanks so much for joining us.